last of the 4 P's of marketing, the place. Okay, those solution that is for earlier case study that we haven't covered in the class. That's for you all to do on your own, the solutions. Okay, so we are now going to look at the MBA area of supply chain management. Okay, as I told you, I'm promising you the MBA plus. But we're going to do that in the context of the place distribution decision, the last of the 4 P's of marketing. Now, once again, you see, this is an accounting course. We're going to follow the control framework. Okay, the control framework. So we're going to look at objectives, analysis of alternatives, and so on. Now, you see that the area of distribution, there's a service cost trade-off. Okay? The objective of distribution is to get the right product to the right place at the right time for the least cost. Thus, the control of distribution function involves a trade-off between maximizing customer service and minimizing distribution costs. Okay? It is not unlike that something we came across in product costing, that you give a certain level of quality for a certain cost. Okay, so it's not cost minimization. Thank you. Only okay. I'm surprised that you all didn't even tell me this, you know. Okay, so service cost trade-off.
We were there to know that.
Yeah, the cameraman also not concentrating, looks like. Okay, so right. Okay, so this is not unlike the product costing requirement of providing a level of quality for the required cost. So you will see that it is not cost minimization or profit maximization, but some sort of trade-off. So this trade-off is related to the level of service. So what do we mean by level of service? One example is the number of days it takes to deliver an order, or the percentage of time that orders can be filled from stock during a period of time without a stock out situation happening, or the percentage of time that the airline seat can be confirmed without a sold out or waitlisted situation arising. So in any of your industries, you can think of a situation of a level of service. If you go to an airline website and you want a seat for a particular flight, how often do they say seats are available? How often do they say sorry or waitlisted? These are all levels of service. In the case of a telephone industry, when you make a call, how long does it say yes, except for the fact that the other side might be engaged? But if not, if there's congestion, then you have a certain level of service. Okay? So minimum desired level from a company's viewpoint should be at least that of its competitors. As the level of service increases, the minimum stock required also rises. As one approaches 100% service range, the stock required rises steeply to such a level that it becomes pointless having huge stocks merely to prevent a stock out situation. Further, the high level of service not only requires high inventories, but also requires large number of warehouse locations and fast means of transportation. All this is directly opposed to minimizing distribution cost objective. So if you have, for example, an airline, you're not going to have a massive fleet of aircraft and huge amounts of flights between two locations simply to ensure a 100% level of service. Okay. So there is, as you approach the 100% level, a huge increase of cost of any of these products or services. Thus, a trade-off is necessary and should give the desired level of service in the most effective manner. So efficiency replaces maximum and minimum concepts accountants usually deal with in cost control. For example, it may be more efficient to use fast, expensive transport, for example, air freight, from a central spot than to maintain a number of local warehouses. Now, the area of place distribution takes an important role in the marketing mix differentiation strategies due to the increasing importance of the internet as a place of products and services to be available to global markets and the technology is available for efficient supply chain management. So you can see that the P is the last P in the marketing mix because it was the boring one. It was the one that involved transportation and trucks and all that compared to the excellent areas of advertising and pricing and so on. But today, it is a key area because of the internet and because of the technologies available. Okay, today, entire businesses are based on this. I mean, Amazon, Google, you name it. Okay, these are all based on essentially the distribution area. The internet, you have your product, you show the price, you have the promotion about what it can do, and you have the place of delivery because you can go and immediately put it in your shopping cart and buy it. So all 4 P's of marketing are there in many companies' websites. So today we are going to concentrate on the area of distribution cost accounting. Now, distribution cost accounting has been around for a long time. I have an original book in this area published in the 1950s by Schiff and Mellman called Distribution Cost Accounting. And when you read it, you realize that Kaplan got his idea for activity-based costing in manufacturing mainly from Schiff and Mellman's book of distribution cost accounting, which is all to do with activities. So well before Kaplan, the concept of costs being driven by activities was there in the distribution area. So we are talking about order processing systems. While advertising expenses are order generating, demand related, distribution expenses can be considered as order processing or supply expenses. I remember I told you that promotion is the one that is demand, everything else is supply related, and those come under distribution cost accounting. The range of activities, note the word activities, include warehousing, transportation, channel selection, web presence or e-commerce, credit control, and inventory control. All of these are part of order processing systems. Particular system of distribution used by the company depends on the nature of the industry, the product, the competition, the channels selected, how many people are going to handle your product, the policy decision of the company, location of one's own warehouses, and the physical characteristics of the end user. So you will see that because of all these things, okay, some of these factors can be and usually are in conflict with each other. For example, geographically scattered end users may be better serviced by outside transport, while one's own geographically scattered warehouses may favor one's own transport. So let's look at one interesting example about the physical characteristics of the end user. Now, one of the products that has been subject to a system of distribution for at least the last 50 years is a company called Interflora. Anyone use Interflora? It's interesting that Interflora is still around. And what they used to do even 50 years ago is that if your girlfriend is in London and on Valentine's Day or her birthday, you want to send her roses, you go to the Interflora agent in, say, Colombo, and you pay the money for a dozen roses, and the agent in London will deliver a dozen roses to your girlfriend. Sorry? It's the same. I mean, now there may be plenty of people and lots of websites doing it, but Interflora was there 50 to 60 years ago doing this. Okay, so what's the name of the company here now? Jenny Flowers. Okay. So, of course, in that case, we all know that you order the product in Colombo, but the roses are, of course, British roses if you're delivering in London. Also, you know that your girlfriend is staying at home waiting for you to send flowers. Okay? So the person would be waiting at home. Now, this sort of concept was taken by a Chinese man in Australia who set up a website called wishlist.com.au. Okay, in that one he didn't go international, but he had a number of warehouses in every major Australian city where he had a range of about 1,000 gifts. So you could go to his website and order a surprise gift for your girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever, and he said he will deliver it to them. But the problem he struck was that if it is not the birthday or Valentine's Day, then the end user may not be at home. So he found a problem that he had to keep on trying to deliver a surprise good. So then he had so he changed his distribution system. He now had two price points. One is for a higher price, he will somehow deliver to the home a surprise gift. But for the second one, he'll try once, and if it's not there, they leave a card for it to be collected at the nearest BP petrol station. Now, I don't know how you would feel about getting a gift to be collected in a petrol station, but that was what he did to solve his problem. So you can see the system evolves. Okay. So distribution cost accounting is divided into two broad areas of study. There is cost analysis, which is essentially lots and lots of analysis, this one here. Lots of analysis, the computation of present and alternate methods of distribution, and the study of related costs. The second one area is cost control, which is, of course, all of the control framework, which includes analysis, cost control, okay, measurement of performance. Okay, so let's look at analysis first. Why do it? Well, I'm going to get you to read all this, but very quickly is to analyze the cost of distributing and promoting products, cost of marketing individual products, costs involved in different classes of customers, lots and lots of calculations such as cost per call, cost per order, okay, and even evaluate managers according to their costs and so on. So lots of reasons for doing this. So thus, for firms using sophisticated supply chain management techniques, you need a detailed chart of accounts for distribution. So later on, I'll show you the things in this chart of accounts. There's a multiplicity of accounting and management science techniques available for the strategic planning of physical distribution systems. We are going to look at three broad areas: symbolic representation, operations research or OR techniques, and simulation. So let's look at the first one, symbolic representation. So here we are going to look at our distribution system through symbols. Now there are three. One is flow charting. So flow charting, okay, the other one is CVP analysis. You can see that coming up here, CVP analysis. And the third one is comparative analysis. So flow charting, basically you can do this static model or a dynamic model, is showing your distribution system. So often it is like this. You have the central company, and then you have the warehouses, warehouse 1, warehouse 2, warehouse 3, and so on. And then you have the end users, maybe retail stores, and so on. Okay, so you can see from here, okay, that this is called a hub and spoke system. Hub and spoke. And you see this in airlines when you take the Brooke on Emirates and so on. You can see the hub being Dubai and then the other spokes, one of them being Singapore, from which flights go out. Okay, so if you look at the American airline system, they have a main hub, which is Dallas or Chicago or New York, and then the spokes. Okay, so this is how you flow chart. Of course, you can put this on a computer simulation and do critical path analysis and so on here. The next one is cost volume profit analysis, where we are showing our distribution system in terms of fixed and variable costs. So here's an example. Now this chart is there later on in your notes, so don't have to take it down. Okay, you can see that here you are saying that if you have a sales agency, then you have a small amount of fixed costs, but a large amount of commissions. If you have a branch, your fixed costs will be much higher, like rental and salaries and so on, but no commissions. So somewhere in between here would be a break-even point. So if your sales are going to be less than this point, agency has a lower cost. If your sales are going to be more than this point, a branch has a lower cost. Okay, now one of the things that you have to remember when you're putting this sort of analysis in a single graph, that is both the agency and the branch, the assumption that you're making is that the agency and branch is equally capable of generating sales. I mean, the sales that is generated can be done by the agency or branch exactly the same. But if the agent is much more capable than the branch of generating sales, then you should not be putting it on the same graph. Okay, the velocity of sales would be different. Anyway, this is one way of symbolically representing your channels. The third one is a very useful one, comparative analysis. Now, this is the Dell model. Okay, this is the logic behind the Dell model. And what I used about maybe now 3 years ago, I used this in a consulting job. So once again, I don't tell people that it's in half a page of my notes. Okay, the consulting job with this sort of framework. So let's look at this. We're going to look at the distribution equation, which is essentially the distribution cost is equal to the transportation cost, the fixed warehousing cost, the variable warehousing cost, and the level of sales. So LS is either the level of service or the lost sales due to average delivery delay. It means the same thing. So you are told that a company uses the distribution system via 6 warehouses. So in my diagram, I have only 4, but it has 6 warehouses. And to maintain a 95% level of service, that means 95% of the time the product is available. And to maintain this level of service carries 1 million of finished goods stock. The marketing director wants to eliminate the warehouses and deliver direct to customers. The estimated effect of the present and proposed scheme for the next year are given below. So here is the computation. Okay, so the current scheme from the company to the warehouse, 165,000, and then from the warehouse, the local shipment to the retailer, 35,000. Direct transport, that is going from the company direct to the retailer, having no warehouses, 350,000, very, very high. The rent, salaries, insurance, rates, and so on would be higher when you have warehouses because there are more places to rent, more people to hire, and so on. They are high, but the communication is lower because you have to be dealing with hundreds of end users from the company, while over here they are local communication, so it's higher. So when you do this computation, the current scheme is 388, the direct to customer is 431. So most accountants who are not CMAs, okay, who are probably IMAs and so on, would have stopped the calculation at this point and said, don't change the scheme, the present scheme is fine. But if you are understanding the concept of residual income and the cost of capital and the charge for cost of capital, you might get a different view. So what we are going to do is now look at the cost of carrying the stock. The cost of carrying the stock. Remember, we said that if you carry the stock, if your inventory is more, your financing is more. So here is the cost of capital, let us say 15%. But there is special non-finance related but inventory related costs, such as if you have stock in all these warehouses, there will be much more handling. When you distribute it, you have to take it down, put it on shelves, take it off the shelves, and so on. More likelihood of obsolescence, deterioration, administration, and insurance. Okay, so if it is coming to about 26% of your stock is going for cost related to the stock, including financing, then you get a different picture. So you're using now the EVA model. From the, in this case, the cost, you're also deducting the cost of holding the inventory. You know that if you have inventory, you're told that if you have inventory in all the warehouses, it's 1 million of inventory. If you have all the requirement inventory in the local company, it's 0.75, so not much of a difference, but enough for you to say that the proposed scheme is actually better than the present scheme. So that is exactly the logic behind Dell's view. Dell thought that there's no point having wholesalers and retail shops and consignment stocks in your various places because of the cost of carrying such an inventory. It delivers straight from order to the customer in 48 hours. Okay, so that is the logic behind that. So very, very powerful analysis using the residual income or EVA concept. Okay, you can see that it's completely different. This method of analysis shows that the scheme proposed by the marketing director is the better choice from a profitability point of view. Okay, the next is operations research techniques. These generally have an objective function which has to be either maximized or minimized. Two general classes of operations research techniques are gravity flow and linear programming models. Now, gravity flow is exactly as we would see from the name, how the water flows easier with gravity. We look at gravity flow models to look at ease of the distribution network. Gravity flow location models usually select an optimum location such as a plant, warehouse or retail store location, and then they sort of do it that way. Now, interestingly, I came across this a couple of years ago during the time of the Sydney Olympics. Okay. Now, just before the Sydney Olympics, myself and a colleague of mine, we wrote a paper about the Atlanta Olympics, the one before Sydney, and we told what a disaster the Atlanta Olympics was. Okay, because they had forgotten about all of these transportation issues. They had certain roads were gridlocked for 3-4 days, traffic didn't move. Other places, major roads were completely free of traffic because they blocked something else, and people were playing baseball on those roads. They've forgotten about people's garbage collection, so garbage is piled up in certain neighborhoods right to the roof. All these problems. Okay, people couldn't get to the location and so on and so forth. So we wrote all this up, and then just, we sort of put a throwaway line. We said from what we are reading about the Sydney Olympics, is going to be as much of a disaster. Okay? Now, this is an academic paper, but somehow maybe a university released this to the newspaper, and suddenly we were, for a short while, hot property. Radio was phoning us for comments, then we were on the newspapers, I was on television, okay, and we were talking that the Sydney Olympics was going to be a disaster, quite a big comment that we made. But we became very popular. Of course, we got a call about maybe 3-4 days later from the Sydney Olympics committee to come and have a look at what they were doing. Okay, and we were actually very impressed. Okay, so what they showed was that the optimum location was Olympic Village in Homebush, same place that Roxa was. But what they had done was, they had looked at which roads are going to be open, how they are going to transport people by buses, by taxis, everything, how the garbage is going to move, everything had been done. They had models, both physical models to show how it works, and also computer simulations. Okay, very impressive. I mean, I was absolutely amazed at the logistics of organizing any big game like the Olympics. I mean, we are talking about people who are coming from so many different countries with all different food habits, kosher and halal and vegan and vegetarian and you name it, and countries like Islamic country without pork, and countries like Papua New Guinea that they only eat pork, and these sorts of things. Okay, in one location, even things like apple, we had to have what 10 million apples, right? In Olympic Village coming at different days. Okay, so it's an amazing exercise. So we went back on television and said, look, our comment was based on the information that we had then, but now we've actually seen it, and it's going to be a great success, and it was one of the great successes. In fact, so much so that the Chinese got that same team to look at the logistics when the next Olympics was in Beijing. So these are gravity flow models. The other is linear programming or operations research techniques. These techniques can be viewed as treating an entire physical distribution system these all aim at specifying a network of optimal paths under a set of express constraint conditions. Okay, so one of the famous one that you may have done in your studies is called the transportation and simplex models. Now, of course, what's the time now at 5 to 3? Okay, you must be thinking, since you studied operations research in your university, just like the probabilities the other day, that you had never used it and what a waste of time to talk about it. But the fact is that if you are in transportation, this is extremely important for you to understand these models. And you are in fact using you're in fact using the transportation and simplex models all the time, even on a daily basis, but you don't realize it. Okay, for example, in the old days, if you had Dubai here and Melbourne, Australia here, and if both were in daylight period, you had only a certain amount of underwater copper lines between the two places, so often there was congestion. I mean, maybe 5-6 years ago, if you made a phone call to India, say, or England, you would hear, sorry, congestion, try again later, right? But have you noticed you never hear that now? Why is that? The reason is because today, because of these sort of transportation situations, we know that London is asleep. So why don't we use the lines between Dubai and London and Melbourne? Okay, and by paying a small accounting charge for London carrying the traffic. So these days, many of the telephone companies give their information about congestion times and so on. And these telephone companies route the call through other locations. In fact, these days, there are some consortiums that when you make a call, you don't even realize that people are bidding for your call. They say, we reduce the accounting rate, come through us, and so on. It's all happening automatically. That is the transportation system. The internet, it's an entire linear programming thing. How do you think your emails go? They don't go as one packet. Your email message is going about 100 different packages through the internet, and there's a system that is collecting all of this, and the email is delivered, right? It doesn't go through one source. So that is why in the old days, when the system was not that good, sometimes the email parts of it disappear, some parts of packets disappear, and your email never gets through. But these days, we have almost 100% success rate. Okay, so linear programming, very important in transportation. Your courier companies, DHL, TNT, huge users of these programs. Lastly, we have simulation. Simulation techniques of all types are increasingly being used to design physical distribution systems. The models are either static, that is non-time dependent, or dynamic, which allows the model to treat time and or sequential stages of a problem in an interrelated manner. Account information system must be sufficient sophisticated to ensure that data can be made available in usable forms and time frames. So it is really dynamic these days. I mean, with your GPSs, with many roads telling you traffic conditions on the road. Is there roads in Dubai that has signs saying 50 minutes more to this location like that? Not yet, or is it already there? Not yet. Okay, in Australia, in certain roads, when you drive in, the road is telling you where the traffic jams are and how long it's going to take, and why don't you try this route? It's giving you information. It's there, isn't it? Yeah.
Only very useful, but it will not tell you the time. It will mention traffic congestion is there.
Okay. No, here in Australia, it won't give the time. Australia, they tell you now 50 minutes more this way, 30 minutes like that. It tells you times. Also, you're getting information all the time from your GPS. Okay, so these are all simulations. Okay, so it is very sophisticated these days. Okay, I mean, sometimes our sophistication gets too much. Now, in Indonesia, a company that I was involved in, I'm still involved in that company, we send trucks out with sophisticated equipment in the truck, so that if the drive, because one truck got disappeared and we didn't know where the truck was or the material, it just disappeared, right? So we put all sorts of things in the truck so that if the truck goes away from its planned route, instantly a message comes to us, right? It took the Indonesian drivers, I am told, less than 2 minutes to dismantle it. Okay, less than 2 minutes. So now all sorts of gadgets are hard welded inside the truck all over the place, and the moment the truck goes off course, they actually, this company, big company, sends a helicopter to find the truck. Okay, that has gone off course. So, I mean, there's technology, and then there's technology that is used to get out of technological problems. Okay, note that the distribution costs often involve cost allocations. Therefore, unless suitable ABC cost allocation system is being utilized by the company, dysfunctional decisions may arise if arbitrary allocations are used. You are having systems that are gravity flow and OR techniques and simulations, but the accounting system is still chugging along of a model 50 years ago. Okay, now let's look at a particular area called channel selection strategies. What are your strategies about getting other people to handle your product? So what are the channel alternatives? It is the task of the marketing function to identify several major channel alternatives for reaching the market. The accountant can help in providing information as to which of the alternatives would satisfy the best long-run objectives of the firm. For this, the accountant should weigh the alternatives against economic, control, and adaptive criteria. Now, the first criteria, economic, is of course important. It looks at distribution costs. But the other two criteria, that's control and adaptive, encompass wider issues. So let's look at that. Economic criteria, of course, that is the most important. It's probably the most important criteria since the firm is not pursuing channel control or adaptability, but pursuing profits. Each alternative will produce a different level of sales and costs. The better system is not the one producing the greater sales or the one producing the lesser costs, but rather the one producing the best profits. The analysis should begin with the estimation of sales under each system, because some costs will be dependent upon the level of sales. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, okay, you got to look at the estimation of sales when you're budgeting in this area. Once sales have been estimated, the next step is to estimate the profitability of each alternate system using either a CVP analysis or an ROI appraisal. So CVP you've seen already. Remember I told you, you can't do this analysis if the branch and the agency are having a different capability in terms of its performance. CVP analysis, so in the both channels produce the same sales or are equally capable. What if they are not? What if there's a difference? Then we have to use some sort of ROI analysis. If it cannot be assumed that both channels produce the same sales or same capability in sales, it is perhaps better to make a straightforward estimation of return on investment. So remember, ROI calculation is very useful because you're controlling for size. Doesn't matter what the size of the business is, you're comparing the profit that is earned by that to the investment. Okay? So this is the ROI calculation, but we have a problem. I'm going to show you a little trick here. Okay, now remember, in the case of a franchise or an agency, we don't have an investment in that agency. In a branch we do, but in this agency we don't. So how can you do a ROI calculation if you don't have a figure for the investment? Okay? Well, here is the trick. Now, when money goes out of your pocket in normal day-to-day life, when money goes out of your pocket, it goes either to buy your lunch, expense, or to buy a car, asset, right? So you realize that credit cash has two possible debits. One is expense and another is asset, right? Difference being one is longer term use of something than the other. So here what we are going to do is we are going to say that return is sales minus cost, that you can accept. But why don't we use the same cost as the investment? So the money that you're expending as a cost is the investment that we're making in the person. I mean, you've heard this in life. You hear people saying, you know, I'm not going to leave my houses and all to my children because they have got from me their education, and that's enough of an investment. So what you're talking about is the cost that you spent on the child's education is the investment that you made in the child. Okay? So we are going to use that same principle here. So now we can compare, because make sure it's like with like, okay? Don't use cost in one case for the agency house and the actual investment in the branch. Even the branch, you have to use the same relativity. So all other things being equal, the channel emerging with the higher ROI is preferred. So little ROI calculation, when there is no investment, you use this method. Okay, so then control criteria. Okay, so first is economic, next is control. Here the economic evaluation is broadened by consideration of the motivational, relational, and conflict aspects of channel alternatives. Motivation, many of the channels use the external to the producing company, and this causes motivational problems. For example, the sales agent, being an independent businessman, is primarily interested in maximizing his or her own profits. This can sometimes lead to sub-optimization from the producer's point of view, but the agent will concentrate on the important customers in terms of his total assortment of goods, rather than on the customers who are most important to his or her client, the producer. Okay, so let's see what that means. I don't know much about the supermarket or department stores in Dubai, but in Australia, we have a department store called Harvey Norman, right, which has all sorts of things. So if you go to Harvey Norman and you are looking at television sets, and you call the salesman, and you are looking at a Sony and a Sanyo, right? Sanyo is cheaper, but you're not too sure about it, you know. You ask the salesman, what is the one that you recommend? Now the salesman will quietly look at the little tag at the bottom of the TV set, which has a few code things, and he realized that the Sanyo is giving a far larger commission to his company than the Sony. Okay, so he will say, oh, Sony has a name, but definitely Sanyo. In fact, my wife bought one yesterday. All lies, of course, but you know, my wife bought one yesterday, right? Or my brother bought one, or something like that. And he will push the Sanyo because his company is getting a higher commission. So he is motivated to sell something that is giving his client more money rather than the producer. So how does Sony try to motivate these people? Well, Sony might not want to give a higher commission. So Sony might say, look, we are not going to put our brand in your shop, so they search for our brand somewhere else when they want a Sony. Or we might give other things like gifts or some sort of bonus for large amount of sales, that sort of thing. Somehow you have to motivate the person to act on your behalf. So that's motivational issues. Then there are relationships. Here the vertical and horizontal relationships of channels must be considered. They may be in conflict, and this always is finally at the expense of the producer. Okay. On the other hand, they may collude to force concessions from the producer as the present situation in the Australian food industry. So in the Australian food industry, just two companies, Coles and Woolworth, control about what 67% of Australians eat. Okay, huge dominance. So they do control prices, because they put the price up to one, the other person, both of them say we are not going to buy you or something, and then you've lost your entire market. So this is what happens. And finally, there is a conflict. The first type of conflict is inter-channel conflict. For example, watch manufacturers have a difficult time in pleasing both small retailers and discount outlets. Now, this used to happen in Australia. I remember when I went in the 1980s to Australia and I wanted, say, a Seiko electronic watch. I go to the jeweler called Dunklins, and I show in the counter, can I see that watch? So they will actually wear, those days, white gloves, take the thing out, show all how the features work, and you look at it and get the demonstration, and then you say, thank you very much. I think about it. And then you go down the shopping center to Kmart, that is the same thing, no white gloves, no demonstration, but much cheaper price, and you buy it. So you got the demonstration from one, the purchase in the other. So of course, the watch manufacturer, the jewelry shops complain, And that's why the watch manufacturers had to come up with their price fighter brands for the Kmarts. You won't find a Seiko in Kmart or Walmart. You'll find the price fighter brand like Alba for Seiko, as I told you, and Q&Q for Casio. So that is inter-channel conflict. Then you have, second is the legal conflict. Question must be asked such as, will the channel contain any questionable feature that might be subject to the Trade Practices Act? For example, a producer who plans to set up exclusive distribution should be first look at his legal status. In many cases, that exclusive thing is illegal, okay, especially anti-competitive. There are legal restraints to contracts that tend to set up monopolies. You saw what happened to Microsoft, okay? They were sued in both USA and in Europe. They lost in USA when they tried to monopolize the search engine, this Windows Explorer. But they lost in Europe, and they are still paying fines. So there are those sorts of things. So you've got to look at the legal status. When franchise and exclusive agency are concerned, there will be formal contracts drawn up. However, there are other regulatory relationships between producers and channels that have no formal contracts. These pertain to discount percentages, credit facilities, quantity discounts, sharing advertising costs, providing dealer training, varying price of different sets of customers. But there are pointers for cooperation. They can also cause conflict. Now, interestingly, many countries have maximum retail price, okay, maximum retail price of many goods. Very few countries have a minimum retail price, okay, minimum price for which you can give it. In Sri Lanka, crazily, recently, one of our foreign ministers or someone told that our 5-star hotels in Colombo have to have a minimum price, and they put it at $150 or $160 a night for a 5-star hotel. Okay, I mean, that's crazy because, of course, you know, certain 5-star hotels are of a lower status than others, and they have no way to fight that in terms of price. In other cases, there may be problems with the agencies. Now, the Volvo agent in England, this must have been about 7 or 8 years ago, he was also selling other cars. So one day there was an advertisement in the papers in England to purchase a Volvo for an extremely cheap price. Okay. And when you went to buy it, it was actually it was a Volvo, but lousy tires and no radio and so on. And then the person tried to upsell you to either another Volvo or maybe a competing car like a Skoda or something. So Volvo got pretty upset because not only was it pricing the car well below its cost of delivering to England, but it was also affecting the esteem value of the brand. So Volvo sued the agent saying that they cannot sell the car for such a low price. That is ruining the brand. So it went to court. Who won? Volvo or the agent? The agent won because court said if the agent wants to be stupid enough to sell the car at a loss, okay, he was doing it to get the product line effect, okay, then Volvo can't do anything about it. So of course Volvo had to wait until that agency agreement was over and not of course appoint them anymore and draw up different contracts. So there are certain legal constraints. Resolution will depend on the bargaining power of the parties involved to get the best terms. Okay, so those are issues to do with the selection of channels. There's one more, adaptive criteria. Here the producer's freedom to adapt to changing conditions is considered. Each channel alternative involves some duration of commitment and loss of flexibility. For example, a producer who decides to use a sales agent may have to offer a 10-year contract. During this period, other means of selling, such as the internet and direct mail, might become more efficient. However, the producer may not be free to drop the sales agent. In general, therefore, the less certain the future seems to be, the less favorable are channel alternatives involving long-term contracts. Okay, so let us say that Dell initially went and drew up some contracts with wholesalers and retailers, and then changed its business model to deliver directly, it would have had a problem. So you've got to be very careful about these long-term commitments, especially in areas where the technology can change quite fast. Okay, now we can see another problem here. Okay, you all are the guinea pigs getting the first round of these notes, so there are a few bugs to sort out. Anyway, distribution cost control. As I told you, the next area is not analysis, but all of the area of the control framework, which includes analysis. Okay. So first thing to do is suitable cost centers. Most conventional accounting systems are not geared to isolating and reporting specific costs of distribution. Typical cost centers of the distribution function are sales order processing, inventory holding, warehousing, and transportation. So your chart of accounts should have those, just like you had in quality, you had training, appraisal, internal failure, external failure. You have these over here. So order processing, including online ordering, this is the start of the distribution operation, involves invoicing, working capital management, inventory accounts receivable, sales commissions, PayPal and credit card fees, and courier and parcel post costs. All of that is part of our sales order processing. Then you have inventory holding. The management accountants has to balance the stock situation very carefully. Having too low a stock will most often lead to the loss of present sales and possibly the loss of future sales. So here's a study by Nielsen covering both food and non-food items in retail outlets, suggests that 95% of the time the manufacturer sales are at risk when its product is not on the shelf. So that's exactly the situation with Suave. If it is not on the shelf, 95% of the time they're not going to buy your product. And where the product is an industrial good, used in the production process, the level may rise to 100%, as second source is now common amongst major manufacturers unless they are operating under JIT conditions. Okay. So it's very important to have this area of inventory control and the balance. So that if you have too low, it's a problem. Too high is also a problem. Rising finished stocks can be an early danger signal of the following. Goods are being produced of which there is no longer a demand. Sales orders temporarily falling and increased promotion effort is needed. Seasonal peaks have been inaccurately forecast. Okay, so in inventory control, I'll leave you all to read this a little bit. The subcategories would be cost of ownership and possession, things like storage cost, material handling, obsolescence, and so on. Purchase order costs, including setup costs, stock out costs, cost of lost sales, and management costs, including supervision, coordination, etc. All that comes under inventory. Then we have warehousing. Here are the subcategories: cost of space utilization, things like rent, rate, lighting, etc. Labor utilization, okay, and equipment utilization. That would come under warehousing. Okay. Transportation, the big one in distribution. There is terminal time, the cost of when the truck is in the terminal, the cost when the truck is running time, and when you're delivering, the costs involved delivery time. So those come under transportation. So you can see the chart of accounts, how it is built up. Okay, so having done all that, if you have a chart of accounts, you can then do ratio analysis, distribution control ratios. Okay. So here are some of the ratios. So you can see that I'm using vertical analysis, like what I showed you in the DuPont ratio tree. I'm using this vertical analysis where I'm dividing everything by sales. So distribution cost in total to sales, that is broken down into sales order processing, inventory holding, warehousing, and transportation. And sales order processing has invoicing, debtors cost, sales commissions. Inventory holding has ownership, purchasing, stock out, management, all of that divided by sales. Warehousing is space utilization, labor utilization, equipment utilization, and transportation, terminal, running, and delivery. So that's the first stage of looking at these. If you're having a proper chart of accounts, some of the control ratios. So any of your companies are serious about distribution, these are the sort of things that you should have. Okay. So we stop with that. Any questions? Stop with that. So that's the last of the P's of marketing. Yes, there's a question there. Sorry? The ROI. Yes? Correct, yes. Well, 1 minute. Okay, there's a question over there. So, yeah? Yeah, so your fixed asset cost, the cost of the asset will be your depreciation. That's the only thing that you will take as the cost. Whatever you're using as a cost in your profit and loss account, fixed asset depreciation would be the cost that you take even for the branch.
So you meant that to be able we have to take the cost of depreciation of this.
Correct. Okay, so when you're comparing the agency and the branch, don't use only costs of the agency, but in the branch, don't use the full asset. Only the depreciation is used.
That is practically, if you have a branch
yes.
in a new country,
yes.
place,
yes.
there is a legal expenses
yes.
incurred for once.
Yes.
Could you incur it at
correct.
Time?
Yes.
For example, the solicitor expenses,
yes.
the investigation,
correct. Yes.
This is, we are not depreciating usually, we consider it as a cost of the year, not in the fixed asset cost.
Well, IFRS will disagree with you. IFRS will say legal expenses and so on to bring the asset into being should be capitalized.
As a management accounting?
No. No. So management accounting, we would, I mean, if it is a one-off cost, for that particular calculation, we will take it as part of the asset cost and only use depreciation.
Which is like IFRS?
Yeah. Okay.